Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Jonathan Dean, and I am the plaintiff who settled, previously anonymous plaintiff who settled with the Archdiocese for $1 million earlier this year, arising out of a case where I alleged that I was sexually assaulted by a priest as a child. I have a prepared statement that I'd like to read for a few minutes, after which I'm happy to take any questions that anybody has. These are personally, what I'm about to read is personally a very important message to me to get out there, and also for treating my post-traumatic stress disorder. So here we go. When I was sexually assaulted as a child, my world stopped being about all the things that make childhood a special and carefree time. I was traumatized, and from that point forward, the trauma forever changed the course and trajectory of my life. As I grew into my teenage years, not knowing any better, I resorted to abusing drugs and alcohol, sex addiction, and other self-destructive behaviors to numb my pain, and my life went dramatically off course. As I grew into adulthood, I found myself consumed by addiction and self-destructive behavior. Casual drinking became excessive, dangerous, and life-threatening, and my life became a shadow of what I had wished for it to be. I contemplated suicide, but I did not even understand why I wanted so badly to kill myself as an adult, because the sexual assault that was the source of my illness had taken place over a decade ago, and I had long ago repressed the memory of it. To put this moment and this settlement in perspective for me, today has been over 10 years in the making, from the time that my memory repression broke in summer of 2013. And I first remembered that 20 years earlier, in 1993, I had been raped by a priest 4 times. Still to this day, having been raped as a child has left a darkness in my soul that I cannot shake and cannot leave behind. It is very common for survivors of childhood sexual assault to repress their memories. That is an established scientific fact. So it begs the question of, why does Missouri have any statute of limitations for legal claims arising out of childhood sexual abuse? Now, when most of us think of a statute of limitations, we think, oh, we have 2 or 5 years, or however many years it is, from the time of the occurrence to file a lawsuit, and that's the extent of what you need to worry about. You either file your lawsuit in time, or you don't. But it's not that simple in cases that allege childhood sexual abuse. Because even when us victims file a lawsuit within the time window permitted by the law, the legal team aligned with the perpetrators will aggressively misuse the statute of limitations against the victim. Maybe they'll first try to trip us up with some trick questions about whether we remembered some feeling or memory earlier in time. If the trick questions don't work, maybe they just distort or flat out misrepresent some other evidence to try to get the court to dismiss the case. Missouri courts are complicit with the perpetrator's misuse of the statute of limitations. In case after case, Missouri courts have sided with the perpetrators of sexual violence and thrown credible victims who make credible claims out of court forever. That is, in fact, what the court attempted to do to my case, one day after negotiating my case to a settlement, where the smart and aggressive attorneys for the Archdiocese made a judgment that, despite their efforts to dismiss my case, it presented such a liability to their client that they needed to settle it for $1 million. One day after that, the court, still unaware that the settlement had occurred, ordered that my case be dismissed based upon the statute of limitations. In doing so, the court ignored my testimony, ignored the testimony of a dozen of my family members and friends, and ignored law handed down by the Missouri Supreme Court, and on the eve of trial, dismissed my case. And the question I have is, how is this possible? Here we stand in 2023, over 20 years after the priest abuse crisis hit the mainstream, and somehow victims who present credible court cases that they were raped by priests are still struggling to be treated fairly and with dignity and taken seriously by Missouri courts. How can it be possible that a person be raped by a priest as a child, be consumed for decades with addiction, to hit bottom, and contemplate suicide, to finally regain memories of the sexual assault, then work for years in therapy to find recovery, work up the courage to file a lawsuit, put forth a credible case, and litigate it for 5 years, for the court to then say, on the eve of trial, sorry, you are out of luck because you waited too long. The fact that Missouri law has a statute of limitations for claims of childhood sexual assault is a political and legal choice to value the comfort and well-being of pedophiles over the lives and well-being of their victims. The Missouri legislature should remove all statutes of limitation for claims of childhood sexual assault. These cases need to reach trials, not be continually dismissed on legal technicalities. And anyone who disagrees has the burden to explain why cases that allege a child was sexually assaulted should ever be subject to being dismissed on a legal technicality, rather than actually addressing the victim's allegations of wrongdoing against the accused perpetrator. Allowing lawsuits that allege the sexual assault of a child to be regularly dismissed on legal technicalities jeopardizes the protection and well-being of children. My case has been reported in terms reflecting that it was a success, and perhaps that's how it may seem in this moment. I'm not sure I would label this lawsuit a success. I want my childhood back. I want my life back that I would have had I not been raped as a 10-year-old. But those moments where my life changed forever are now long gone, having taken place decades ago, and time has passed my childhood self by. Thank you for coming today. Before I wrap up and take your questions, I want to take a moment to publicly thank 2 people. When the Archdiocese tried to get my case dismissed, one argument that they tried was that no one told them that the priest was dangerous to children. That argument did not work for them because my elementary school principal from 30 years ago, Mrs. Lori O'Connor, came forward and said that that wasn't true. Mrs. O'Connor said that she had reported the priest to the Archdiocese for inappropriate conduct with children right around the time that I was being raped. When the attorneys for the Archdiocese attempted to change her testimony, and then my attorneys went back to her and asked her to clarify her testimony, Mrs. O'Connor told all the attorneys that she had had enough, that she had something to say, and that she planned to speak her own truth. Survivors of sexual violence need more people like Lori O'Connor, who are willing to throw down the gauntlet and stand up and speak the truth of their lived experience, however painful it might be, knowing now what we all know. I also want to recognize and thank Detective John Brody of the Chesterfield Police Department. He was on duty on a random late night in November in 2017 when I couldn't sleep, tormented by memories of being sexually assaulted, and I decided I couldn't wait any longer than that moment to file a police report against the priest who raped me. Detective Brody took the report for over an hour over the phone at midnight that night spent weeks investigating my complaint, conducted an interview of me, gathered evidence, made phone calls, and referred my criminal complaint to the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office. When no one at the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office called me to explore my criminal complaint further, Detective Brody took note, and he called me himself. He told me he was sorry that happened to me. He considers the rape of a child a terrible evil. And he didn't know why the prosecutor's office wasn't following up on my complaint, but that he was there for me if I needed anything. When someone is raped as a child, it shatters their ability to trust anyone. But Mrs. O'Connor and Detective Brody, by just doing what they felt like was the right thing to do, did a little bit to restore my trust in the world, and I will warmly remember that and carry their attention and kindness with me for the rest of my life. They have made a profound impact on my life by just taking a small stand on behalf of me when it mattered. And lastly, I just want to say that, you all know someone, whether you know it or not, who's a survivor of rape or sexual assault. If you are given the opportunity to provide that person or person's support, please take it. If they come to you and they tell you what happened to them, how they were victimized, how they were traumatized, how they are struggling, please listen. It will make you uncomfortable, there's no doubt about it. But by just listening and saying that you are sorry that happened to them, you can make an enormous difference in that survivor's life. Recognition by another human being is far and away the most important recovery that any survivor can get as they seek to recover from the trauma of the sexual assault. And the urge to look away, to ignore, to bury our head in the sand is almost irresistible when it comes to childhood sexual abuse. Because the thought of children being sexually assaulted is so disturbing and repugnant to us all. Don't do it. Don't look away. Thank you for your time and attention. And provided I don't melt into a puddle on the floor, I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has. No, there's.
I guess with the settlement, it means that they don't admit guilt. Is that it, or what's the nature of the settlement?
Yeah, there is a provision in the settlement agreement specifying that they deny liability.
One piece of it is, you said the day after the settlement, the case was dismissed. I'm not an expert on the law, but typically when there's a settlement, isn't the case dismissed?
Eventually, yeah. Typically, when there's a settlement, the court will eventually dismiss the case pursuant to the terms of the settlement. But what happened here is that the Archdiocese had been actively trying to get the case dismissed. And it just so happened, it was just kind of a quirk of timing that we reached settlement terms on June 6th, but that the Archdiocese didn't withdraw their motion to dismiss after we settled. And we hadn't yet notified the court that a settlement had been reached. So the court went ahead and granted the Archdiocese motion to dismiss before we let the court know that she didn't need to rule on it.
Because they thought the repressed memory argument wasn't going to hold, or why was it dismissed?
I can send you the court's order dismissing the case, but the court essentially said that I needed an expert to say that my memory was repressed in order to take advantage of the repressed memory exception to the statute of limitations. Now, that doesn't really make too much sense to me, because all any outside expert would do would review all the evidence and make an opinion about whether or not my memory was repressed, which is, at the end of the day, that's the judge's job. Yeah, yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, it was, there was a time period where, I knew I had a legal claim and I just wasn't sure if I wanted to put myself through it. And I'd even decided to not go forward with it. You get a lot of advice from people, don't dwell on the past. And I think it really was building a network of support and a network of community. I found the right people in my life who could give me support with this. And it was through those people and their support that I gained the strength to do this. And so I really stand on their shoulders today too. Yeah.
Did this case play a role in your pursuit to become a lawyer?
No, I actually, when my memory repression broke, it was right after I graduated law school. So we could maybe kind of psychoanalyze me, and maybe that's why I went to law school. I mean, who knows?
With this being the biggest settlement for a survivor like you, what impact are you hoping that this will have on the community?
I mean, I think that, the Missouri legal community, the St. Louis County Circuit Court where a lot of these cases are heard, and the Missouri legislature really need to look at removing the statute of limitations for childhood sexual abuse for civil cases. Because, when you look at kind of prosecuting or trying to prevent childhood sexual abuse, oftentimes these perpetrators, they commit their crimes in secret behind closed doors. It's just them and a child. And so for that reason, unless there's overwhelming evidence, a prosecutor is really hesitant to take a case because, proving a case like that where it's just kind of like, a perpetrator and a child or a perpetrator and a young adult is kind of a, he said, she said, or he said kind of situations is very difficult to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But then when you have circumstances where the perpetrator can take advantage of a statute of limitations or manipulate it really easily, they basically are in a situation where, they can really easily evade accountability for their crimes. It's like they can really easily evade accountability for, in the criminal courts. And if they have these statutes of limitation that they can really easily manipulate into their favor, they can evade accountability in the civil courts too.
You think the Archdiocese is hiding behind the statute of limitations to protect itself?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So that's what you're here to bring attention to, is what I understand.
Yeah.
In the sense that abuse happened is what you're saying, and so own up for it. Don't hide behind the statute of limitations.
Yeah. Well put.
I know there was another victim as well by this priest, and there's, a ton of other survivors. Have you been able to connect with other survivors?
I haven't. I would like to. It's just kind of more a matter of, I haven't gotten around to it yet.
To your knowledge, is there any Missouri lawmaker who's pushing a bill or something to help eliminate the statute?
I've been told that the Missouri Association of Trial Lawyers is pushing a bill. I also know that my attorney, who Rebecca Randall, is based out of Kansas City. I know she's also been working on that too, and I would encourage. I can get you their contact information after today. Yes.
You mentioned a lot of the reform that needs to happen in the law. What do you think that churches can do to help prevent these actions?
I think at the end of the day, it's kind of a community responsibility. People need to, kind of keep their eyes open and their ears open for, if somebody's doing something that just doesn't seem right, then people need to report it, whether it's to, kind of mandatory reporting agencies, government agencies here in Missouri, or supervisors. Mrs. O'Connor, when she testified, she said that, this priest was coming into classrooms and putting children on his lap and kind of bouncing them up and down on his lap and kind of, blocking children in doorways so that children's heads were kind of at the level of his waistline. And she reported him for that, and she should be commended for that. And there was so long where I didn't remember the abuse, but when I told family members, you know, and my parents, people said, oh yeah, there was always chatter in the community that, you know, something was going on. It's like what they said in Spotlights. Everybody knew something was going on. And, you know, if you know that something's going on, like, do something about it. You know, it's a hard thing to do, you know. It's a hard thing to stand up and say, you know, I don't think your conduct with children is appropriate. That's a hard thing to do. But I think the lesson that we've all learned is that you have to do it. You know, and if you're wrong, you know, that people make mistakes, but I think on this point, it's better to maybe make a mistake than to, you know, allow a perpetrator to continue to abuse a child.
Earlier this year, Maryland Governor Westmore signed legislation removing the statute of limitation for child sex abuse cases. If you had a message directly to a legislator listening to this, or the governor himself, what would that message be?
It would be to sign that same bill. Remove it. Remove a statute of limitations going forward for any civil claims of childhood sexual abuse, and remove it retroactively too.
I'm sure your 10-year-old self would be so proud to you today. What would you say to your 10-year-old self?
I got you. Any other questions I can answer for anyone?
You were saying remove it retroactively, because if they removed it today, that would mean for children today going forward, but we've got all this history, that, will you explain that a little bit, what you mean by retroactive?
Yeah, I mean, there is, you know, currently a kind of evolving awareness of childhood sexual assault, not just by clergy members, but, you know, other people too. I think we see it most in the priest sex abuse context. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of survivors out there who have been time barred from filing claims, you know, or their cases have been dismissed because the law has not kept up with people's awareness of, you know, how repressed memory, how involuntary repressed memory works. And so, you know, removing the statute of limitations retroactively makes up and atones for that.
Is there any other work we can look forward to from you in your pursuit to reform statute of limitations?
You know, I may contact some legislators and political leaders, and I got to be honest with you, I was really focused for a few months on this day and kind of getting this day taken care of. And, you know, now that it's over, maybe, you know, I'll let you know, okay?
What do you think it was about this case? I mean, it's been said it's the largest settlement. I don't mean to be difficult, I don't know if that's true, but it's definitely one of the largest from what I've read.
Yeah.
What is it about this case that made it rose to that level? There's been so many cases that have come forward. Do you have any idea? Is it because you're a lawyer and know the law? Is it, how were you able to receive that kind of settlement? I've heard of much smaller settlements.
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of smaller settlements too. You know, I'm not entirely sure. You know, I you know, haven't asked the attorneys for the Archdiocese, and I think if I did, they wouldn't tell me what their reasoning was. You know, I think a big part of my argument, like at the end of the case, and especially seeing their efforts to dismiss it, which kind of left my jaw on the floor a little bit after I testified and a bunch of my friends and family testified, was that, you know, I'm a recovered person. You know, I'm maybe luckier than other survivors. I could be in a lot worse shape, and I can speak about this. I don't know if that resonated or not. I can't speak to what their considerations are, you know, but, you know, I do know that there's a lot of settlements that have occurred out there in the low six figures, and if, you know, if a child is sexually assaulted, you know, if somebody sexually assaulted a child and redirects their entire life, I'm just not sure that amount of money is really adequate. I mean, it's something, and it's recognition, but I just don't think those amounts are sufficient to atone for the wrongdoing.
Kind of 5 years from when you filed the case to the settlement, that's a long time. How often would you meet and have meetings over this case?
So we had COVID in there, which kind of shut down the court system for a little bit, and so I think that kind of accounted for that 5 year time span. But early in lawsuits, things kind of move kind of slowly. There's a lot of record gathering that takes place, and then depositions need to occur, and I think probably like a normal time span for this lawsuit would have been like 2 to 3 years, maybe 3.5 years. But then you throw COVID in there, and all of a sudden, you're a little bit over 5 years.
Would you meet at Regali Center here in Shrewsbury ever for meetings, or where would you guys meet to discuss it?
Myself and my attorneys.
Yeah, and the Archdiocese, where does this handle? And so much of this is outside the public light that, I haven't, I've seen some cases in Illinois
Mm-hmm.
before, but here in Missouri, here in St. Louis, I haven't seen it happen in court.
Yeah, I mean, there was hearings in court. There was hearings in open court about the case, and of course, I filed this case anonymously. But a lot of the substantive discovery takes place. A lot of the part of the lawsuit, the fact-finding part of the lawsuit, is called discovery, and a lot of that takes place in the form of depositions, which is really just kind of behind closed doors. So I sat for a deposition with the attorneys for the Archdiocese. It started at 11 in the morning. I think I got out of there at 8 p.m. at night. It was a grueling day. And then after that, the Archdiocese deposed my mother, my father, my brother, my sister, and my other brother. And then a year after that, they deposed about 8 of my best friends who I had told about this too. So, all that, unfortunately, takes some time, and they get very significant discovery. I mean, I opened up my entire life to them. Yeah.
Knowing that you were not the only victim to come forward with your story, did that help you at all come forward later on?
Yeah, it did. Knowing that people had brought these cases before, that Rebecca, is one of the experts here in Missouri, bringing these cases on behalf of injured plaintiffs who were sexually abused as children, like knowing that there's like kind of an established infrastructure, like legal support system around that was huge. I mean, I've heard stories from like the early survivors back in the 80s and 90s and how challenging it was. It's certainly like a better environment now, but having been through all of it and reading the law and knowing what the law is and how the law hasn't kept up with the established science especially about how victims repress their memory, like the Missouri legal system, like in particular, is still a very hostile place for survivors of childhood sexual abuse, primarily because of the statute of limitations, but there's also some other laws that are very unfavorable to survivors.
Now that you're back in St. Louis, have you been able to connect with your former teacher and the detective?
I have not, no. I would like to someday, but I certainly wanted to thank them publicly for their support. Any other questions I can answer? Okay, I'll go ahead and wrap up then. Thank you everyone for coming today. I really appreciate it.